This is Duke University.
Filmmaker Byron Hurt has done films on black masculinity and, of course, the classic film Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. Byron Hurt returns with a new film, Food Junkies, which premieres on the Independent Lens series on PBS on January the 14th. And Byron Hurt joins us on Left to Black. My name is Anthony Neal, and this is Left to Black.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real IG for this one. Yeah.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal, and we're joined this afternoon by Mr. Byron Hurt, award-winning independent documentary filmmaker. His films include I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America, the now classic Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, and Byron Hurt's latest film, Food Junkies, premieres on January 14th as part of the PBS series Independent Lens. How are you doing today, Byron?
I'm doing great, Mark. How are you? And thanks for having me on, by the way.
Man, it's a pleasure to have you on. I was going over your bio, and I didn't realize that your people come from Milledgeville.
Yes, that's right. Did you also know that Milledgeville was once the capital of Georgia?
Yeah, I had the chance to go down to speak to Georgia State there about a year and a half ago. That's the only reason why I knew anything about Milledgeville.
Right. So yeah, both of my parents are from Milledgeville, Georgia. Most of my family sort of comes out of Milledgeville, Georgia. My grandfather still lives there. We still have Thanksgiving dinner down in Milledgeville. We have family reunions down there. So it's almost like a home away from home for me.
You know, this new film with your Food Junkies, and you've been working on it now for a few years, and of course it very much pivots on where the African American community is, the black community is now in terms of our eating practices, eating more healthy, thinking about healthier lifestyles. But in many ways, this is a film that takes you back home, takes you back down to the South to kind of trace the roots of your own family's practices around eating. And so talk a little bit about the inspiration for this film, particularly your relationship to your father.
Well, my father is the inspiration for this film. At the end of production and editing for Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, my father was diagnosed with a very serious form of cancer called pancreatic cancer. When I learned about my father's illness, I started to do some research. I discovered that a high-fat, red meat diet, obesity, and other sort of food-related issues had a real impact on those who were diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And so I looked at my father's diet. I looked at the fact that my father was overweight for, as long as I could remember, even though he had lost some weight, but he was still technically overweight. And, I started to make connections, and I started to make connections to the food that I grew up with, which was primarily like soul food, and on some level fast food and other processed foods, and the food that my father ate and the food that my family in general ate, but then what my community eats. And then I started to make the correlation between the high rates of cancer and diabetes and hypertension and heart disease and all of those different diseases. We as African Americans pretty much top the list in almost every single category. Yeah. And so that's when I started to think, well, this food thing is really big. It's bigger than I ever thought it was. And, I just wanted to make something that was going to get us African American people to look a little bit closer at the food that we eat, the kind of food we have access to, the kind of food that we can afford or not afford, and that's why I made the film.
There's a scene early in the film, and it's a great scene when you're driving back down south and you go to an HBCU football game. And of course, they're outside before the game cooking up the pots, and you're talking to these brothers, and they got their little pot of a whole bunch of stuff, plus some turkey necks, and you're a little reticent, right, to stick your hand in the pot. But, at the same time, you're hearing the community. I mean, you talked about this whole dynamic about how it's always about sharing, right? And you're not being thoughtful of the community. Mm-hmm. If someone offers you something from their pot and you say no, and you being a vegetarian, all these kind of dynamics, you're kind of working through this process. Talk a little bit about kind of the cultural meanings behind soul food. Because, on the one hand, it is about sustenance, right? It's about, particularly in terms of fast food, what folks can eat. But we've built a whole culture in this country around these foods and the kind of leisure time that we have around consuming these foods.
Yeah. Well, you know, when I was growing up, Mark, every time we came from New York all the way down to Millersville, Georgia, the first thing that my father would always say to me and my sister is, when somebody offers you a plate of food, don't turn it down. Accept the plate of food. And it didn't matter if we had been to 5 houses already and had food, or if we were starving. It didn't accept that food. And that was just a part of the culture. And he explained to us that, people took food very seriously down in the South. It was their way of showing you that they loved you and cared about you, and that they would be, offended if you didn't accept their offering, And so that was how I was raised and how I was trained. And even to this day, Mark, I mean, it's hard for me to turn down a plate of food because I don't want to offend whoever it is that's offering me the food. So when I went down to Jackson, Mississippi, and those brothers were standing around that junk pig pork and the pig feet and the pig ears and the turkey necks and all of that kind of stuff, I literally had my father on my shoulder, and his voice was telling me, don't turn it down. So as an adult, I still struggle with that. And there's a lot that I don't eat anymore, Mark. I mean, there's a lot that comes out of the soul food tradition that I have to admit it tastes very good, but I don't eat a lot of it anymore. And so the film kind of grapples with that.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined this afternoon by award-winning independent documentary filmmaker Byron Hurt. We're talking about his new film, Food Junkies, which premieres on the PBS series Independent Lens on January the 14th. Byron, if we were to talk to some of our elders, they might say to us, well, we were raised on this food, right? Our parents were raised on our food, right? We can go back 2 or 3 generations of folks being raised on this food. But yet, in this moment, we're seeing that there's something about this food that's not healthy for us. What do you think has changed? I mean, what did you find out in the context of making the film about what might have changed in this context?
Well, I do think you're right. I think it is a generational thing. And I heard a lot of that as I was making the film from young and old people. But I think some of the things that have changed are the food system. The food system is producing food now that has a tremendous amount of pesticides and other really toxic chemicals in our food that's really it's really hurting us, and it's harmful to our bodies. So I think that in previous generations, as Dick Gregory says, people were growing their own food, people had their own gardens. People were eating more organic food because they were in control of what they were growing. Now that's not the case so much. Also, we live much more sedentary lives than I think generations previously. And we eat a whole lot more processed food and a lot more fast food than previous generations. So I think all of those things factor in. And that's why I wanted to make a film that addressed some of those issues, because I wanted to complicate the whole notion that soul food was wholly unhealthy, because a lot of soul food is healthy, right? Some of it is really good for you. But it's all about the preparation, how you cook it, the way you cook it, how long you cook it, and also what else are you eating on top of that could be harmful to our bodies.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it was real easy to have this as a kind of a standard diet if literally you were forced to work in the fields, 8 or 9 hours a day, right? I mean, so, there was this balance. Your first film specifically deals with Black masculinity. Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, of course, thinks about Black masculinity in the context of hip hop. And some folks might think that, this might be a different direction for you in terms of Soul Food Junkies. But talk a little bit, and you mentioned a little bit of this earlier in relationship to your father, about the relationship of Black masculinity to a healthier lifestyle in general, but healthier eating. And particularly this difficulty that many men have in terms of going to the doctor to actually deal with the kind of simple, what we always think of as just simple aches and pains, but sometimes might be, reflective of something much more serious going on in our bodies.
That's absolutely true. And yes, this film is somewhat of a departure from my previous work dealing specifically with Black masculinity. But I think if you really paid attention and you look closely, I mean, the film is really a love story between me and my father and my family and my father, and my love for this man who meant so much to me and who I really wanted to change his eating habits so that he can live as long as possible, and his sort of resistance to that. And I think my father is like many black men who, are hard to change, hard to make adjustments to tradition, and who don't necessarily take care of themselves in the best way that they can. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, there are a lot of African-American men who don't go to the doctor when we feel, or when we don't feel right.
Yeah.
When your body doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
A lot of us, we feel invulnerable, we feel invincible. We don't trust the healthcare system, and understandably so, based on our history here in this country. So I think that the film does address black masculinity, but in a very specific kind of way, in terms of our health and our wellness and our overall well-being.
In the time since you've done Food Junkies and the film before then, Hip Hop Beats and Rhymes, you had the opportunity to get married. You have a young daughter now. How has that kind of change in your life it affected your filmmaking, right? In terms of perhaps making you more focused, thinking about a wider range of things to do film on? I mean, how has that changed your process?
That's a really good question, Mark. Well, I will say this: I don't work as hard. I don't work as long. Because I want to spend real quality time with my daughter. So, it's helped me to not be so much of a workaholic. So that's one thing. But there are so many different stories that I'd like to tell. Because I am a father, because I have a daughter. I mean, just being a parent now just brings up all sorts of issues that I had not even thought about, like corporal punishment, for example. Like my wife and I have, made a decision that we're not going to, hit our child, right? And a lot of people, especially in the black community, think that's real crazy, that we would make that kind of decision. But, I think about things like that, and I think that would be a real interesting, topic to pursue as a film. But I think overall, in general, I think it has made me more focused because I want to continue to do what I love. I want to continue to be successful as a filmmaker. I want to be able to show and model to my daughter, what success looks like when you pursue something that you're passionate about, that you love, and that sort of helps to define who you are. So I think that she gives me a lot of motivation, in that way.
You're watching Left to Black, and we're joined this afternoon by Mr. Byron Hurt, award-winning independent documentary filmmaker. His films include I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America, the classic Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, and his newest film, Food Junkies, which premieres on the Independent Lens series on PBS on January the 14th. I'm going to change directions a little bit here, Byron. I know I see you fairly regularly on Facebook, so you're embedded in the social media world.
Yes,
and of course, the big conversation in social media, at least since Christmas Day, is the new Quentin Tarantino film, Django Unchained. Have you been surprised at all by how much commentary there has been about the film? And I'm particularly interested in your response to kind of commentary about the film amongst folks who haven't seen the film.
Well, honestly, I have been surprised. I mean, I was actually blown away, and I'm still blown away at the amount of discussion that has come out of that film, especially via social media. Yeah. And I watched the film, and to be real honest with you, Mark, I didn't think I was going to like the film. I wasn't really so, I didn't know if I wanted to see the film, to be honest with you. But I did know that this was going to be sort of like a really important film in the culture, so I wanted to go check it out. And I wasn't as disturbed by it as a lot of people are, to be honest with you. Now, I'm not saying the film doesn't have problems. I'm not saying that Quentin Tarantino clearly doesn't have his issues as a filmmaker as it relates to black people and the black community. But, I was really surprised at how angry and upset and hostile people were toward the film without even going to see the film for themselves. And I know for me as a filmmaker, I can't stand it when people make judgments about my films, about my work, if they haven't seen my work. I mean, I think you have to first go see something before you come to a conclusion or a judgment. But I think that Quentin Tarantino is the kind of polarizing filmmaker, and he has a history of offending Black folks in a way that makes people really sort of repulsed by his work. And I mean, that's really what I saw. A lot of people who are repulsed by the idea of Quentin Tarantino making a film that is set during a slavery period.
A lot of it, I imagine, comes down to this kind of question of access. I mean, and when you hear Spike Lee's comments about Quentin Tarantino, a lot of it is about what kind of films Spike Lee is able to make, what kind of funding he can get for films. But a lot of it also has to do with an audience, and I think the Black community bears some responsibility here in terms of even us as a community knowing what kind of work our filmmakers are making. I felt very differently about Django Unchained, which I found entertaining because I had seen Halle Jarima Sankofa, right? And I wasn't expecting Tarantino to do Sankofa. Had I not seen Sankofa before, I might feel very differently about, Quentin Tarantino in that context.
I agree with you 100%.
And it makes me wonder for you as a documentary filmmaker, talking about this question of access, I look at someone like Ken Burns, who, is high on the food chain in terms of documentary filmmaker, who can partner with his daughter to do this incredible film about the Central Park Five. But I wonder how many Black documentary filmmakers would have had the opportunity to do a film like that and would have gotten the kind of support right, and the way that the film's been publicized the same kind of way. I mean, what are the challenges you face as a Black independent film director, documentary film director, trying to really be able to just make the projects that you want to make?
Well, I think as a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, I think I've been luckier than many, because I have had the benefit of having resources and getting funded from, large institutions like the Ford Foundation and ITVS and the National Black Programming Consortium. There are some filmmakers that don't get that kind of support at all. Right. But having said that, I think that filmmakers like Tarantino and Ken Burns on the documentary filmmaking side, they do have greater access. They do have people who are willing to support them to tell whatever kind of story that they want to tell, whether it has to do with, Black people or any other group of people that they want to explore. I think that is unfortunate, because there are a lot of, burgeoning documentary filmmakers out there who want access, who need some sort of support, but they can't get it because, there are other white filmmakers who are telling stories about us, right? And so, I haven't seen Central Park Five. I respect Ken Burns as a filmmaker. I've met Ken Burns. I just wish that, we as African-American filmmakers had that level of support, from institutions, who have the pockets to support us. That being said, though, now that we live in an era of crowdfunding and Indiegogo and Kickstarter, we can do a lot of those things on our own now in ways that circumvents the gatekeeper, so that we can have our stories told and we can, be at the helm of our own projects. But again, that's a lot of work. To have a Kickstarter campaign is a lot of work. And you have to get people to support you who may not be familiar with your work and what you're capable of. But to that extent, I think that we have a long way to go before we can get, filmmakers on the same level as a Ken Burns or a Tarantino or any other white filmmaker who can get millions of dollars to tell a story about, Black people, Black culture, the Black community, or what have you.
What's next for you, Byron?
Well, I'm going to be taking this film on the road. I'm going to be traveling all over the country showing it, having community conversations. The film is going to be a part of ITVS's community engagement program called Community Cinema, and it's going to be shown at over 100 cities around the country. I won't be at all 100 cities, but I'll be showing the film and traveling with it. And then I'd like to get started on my next documentary, which I plan to announce shortly after the broadcast.
We've been joined this afternoon by Mr. Byron Hurt, award-winning independent documentary filmmaker. His films include I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America, Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, and now classic film about Black masculinity in hip hop. and his latest film, Food Junkies, which will premiere on the PBS series Independent Lens on January the 14th. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, Byron.
Thank you very much, Mark. And again, I appreciate all of your support. You've been very supportive for me for many years now, and I thank you so much. And I see your tweets and I see your posts on Facebook in support of me. And I mean, that's the kind of support that I love to get. So thank you very much.
Man, we appreciate the work that you do, man.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real life G for this one. Yeah. All black everything. All black, you know. All black in the name of all my black heroes. All black everything. All black polos. All black medallions, yeah. All black, you know, say. All black everything. All black, you know. All black in the name.